Imagine this. You've built a life with someone for over a decade. You've got 2 kids together, a home, memories, the whole picture of what you thought was forever. And then one day, you find out he's been cheating. Not just cheating, but with a woman who actually knew about you. She'd met you, smiled at you, and still decided to cross that line. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's a story about betrayal, humiliation, and the kind of revenge that doesn't come with screaming or fighting, but with silence and receipts. And trust me, once you hear how it all plays out, you'll never look at betrayal the same way again. When I think back on the life I thought I had, it almost feels like watching a movie where you already know the ending. And you just want to scream at the screen, "Don't trust him, don't believe it." But of course, real life doesn't come with spoilers. At 33, I had already been married for over a decade to a man I believed was my partner for life. His name is Mark, 35, charming in that boy-next-door way that made people naturally like him. We met in college. We grew up together, and by the time we were in our late 20s, we had 2 beautiful kids, Emma, who's 11 now, and Jack, 9. To the outside world, we were just another suburban family. Soccer practices, PTA meetings, birthday parties with too much sugar. It looked picture perfect, but what no one saw, what I didn't see, was the cracks forming underneath. I didn't catch Mark cheating right away. Cheaters are slippery like that. They know how to hide in the routine of everyday life. He'd tell me he had to stay late at the office, or that a work project needed extra hours, and I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He'd been my best friend for years, the father of my kids, the man I trusted most. But then there were little things that didn't add up. He'd come home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now glued to his hand. He suddenly started going to the gym more often, buying new shirts, fixing his hair like he was 10 years younger. At first, I brushed it off, told myself he was just going through some kind of midlife phase. But deep down, something in me knew. You know that gut feeling, that whisper that says something's wrong. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder every day. The day I found out the truth is still burned into my memory. It wasn't dramatic, like catching him in the act. It was quieter, crueler. I went to drop off lunch at his office one afternoon, something I'd done plenty of times before. The receptionist looked uncomfortable when she saw me, and that was my first clue. Then I walked past the break room, and there they were, Mark and Dana. Her name still leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. She was 30, worked in his department, and the worst part, she knew me. She'd met me at a company picnic. She'd shaken my hand, complimented my kids, and smiled like she was my friend. And yet there she was, leaning into my husband like he was hers. They weren't kissing, not then, but the way his hand lingered on her arm, the way they looked at each other. You don't need to see lips touch to know you're witnessing betrayal. Mark's face went white when he saw me. Dana, she had the audacity to smirk like she had won some prize. In that moment, my whole world collapsed in silence. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just turned and walked out, holding on to the little box of takeout like it was the only thing keeping me standing. Later that night, when he came home, he tried to spin it, of course. Said I was overreacting, said Dana was just a friend. Said I was imagining things. But once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. I pressed, demanded answers, and finally, after hours of arguing, he admitted it. Yes, he'd been seeing her. Yes, it had been going on for months. And then came the part that made me sick. He tried to justify it. He told me Dana was safe because she was sterile, couldn't get pregnant, and that it was just fun. As if reducing another woman to her ability to bear children somehow made it better. As if cheating was less of a betrayal if it couldn't result in another family. That was the night I told him to leave. I packed his bag, shoved it into his hands, and told him he wasn't my husband anymore. He begged, he cried, he swore he loved me and the kids. But love doesn't look like that. Love doesn't lie to your face for months. Love doesn't sneak around with someone who looked you in the eye and pretended to be a friend. I wasn't just angry, I was broken, and yet, beneath the pain, there was a strange sense of clarity. I knew this wasn't a mistake I could forgive. I knew the man I thought I married was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And as I watched him walk out the door, I promised myself I wouldn't let him back in, no matter what excuses he threw at me, because once trust is shattered, it doesn't come back. The night after I kicked Mark out felt unreal, like I was living in someone else's body. The house was too quiet. The kids were asleep upstairs, unaware that their father had packed a bag and left in the middle of the night. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the wedding photos on the fridge, at the smiling faces that looked like strangers now. I thought about all the birthdays we'd celebrated, the vacations, the late nights with crying babies when he'd hold them while I tried to catch a few hours of sleep. Were all of those moments lies? Or was he two different men? The husband who laughed with me on family road trips, and the man who slipped into Dana's bed after telling me he was working late. The questions ran in circles in my head until I felt dizzy. By morning, the messages started. At first, they were the usual apologies. I made a mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, just talk to me. I ignored them. Then the calls came. Voicemails that started out with tears and ended with anger. You're throwing our whole marriage away over nothing. Dana doesn't mean anything. She's just a distraction. The more he talked, the more pathetic he sounded. He wanted me to believe that cheating on me for months was nothing, that betraying our family was something I should sweep under the rug. But I wasn't that woman anymore. The one who believed his excuses, who trusted his late nights and work trips. That version of me had died in that office break room when I saw him with her. But the thing about cheaters is, they don't just want to be forgiven, they want control. Mark didn't stop calling. He showed up at the house more than once, pounding on the door until I had to threaten to call the cops. He told me he couldn't live without me, that he loved me, that Dana was just fun because she couldn't get pregnant. He said those exact words, like reducing her to her infertility somehow made his betrayal less ugly. And in a twisted way, it made me hate him even more. Not just for cheating, but for degrading another woman in the process. It was like he wanted me to see her as beneath me, so I'd feel grateful to be chosen instead. But I wasn't playing that game. I didn't pity Dana, not for a second. She had looked me in the eye and smiled at my kids while sneaking around with their father. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't some innocent victim of his lies. She was a willing accomplice. And in my mind, that made her just as guilty. The kids started asking questions after a few days. Where's Dad? Emma's voice cracked when she asked, and I hated that I didn't have a clean answer. How do you tell an 11-year-old that her dad chose someone else over his family? That the man she looks up to broke her mother's heart? I told them he was staying somewhere else for now, that we needed a little space. They didn't push, but the disappointment in their eyes cut deeper than anything Mark had said. Children know more than we give them credit for. They can sense when the air in the house changes, when love turns sour. And I promised myself in that moment that no matter how messy things got between me and Mark, I would shield them from as much of it as I could. They didn't deserve to carry the weight of his choices. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, lawyer meetings, and Mark's endless attempts to claw his way back. Some days he was sweet, sending flowers, writing long messages about how he'd do anything to fix what he broke. Other days he was cruel, blaming me for not being enough, for pushing him away, for letting the spark die after 2 kids. It was like dealing with 2 different men, flipping between guilt and gaslighting. But either way, I didn't fall for it. Every time I doubted myself, I remembered that smirk on Dana's face in the office, the way she looked at me like she'd won. That image hardened me. I wasn't going to be the wife who turned a blind eye. I wasn't going to teach my daughter that being betrayed was something you tolerated. By the time the divorce papers were signed, I was exhausted. The fight had drained every ounce of energy I had. But beneath the exhaustion was a quiet strength I didn't know I had. I had stood my ground. I had walked away from a man who wanted to break me down to keep me. And though the future felt uncertain, raising 2 kids alone, figuring out how to rebuild, I knew I had made the only choice I could live with. Mark could beg, he could cry, he could call Dana just fun until he turned blue. But the truth was simple. He had already destroyed the family he was trying to save, and there was no going back. After the divorce papers were signed, I thought I would feel free. People always talk about that moment like it's a release, as if cutting ties with someone toxic means you can just breathe again. But freedom doesn't come wrapped up in a legal document. It comes slowly, in small, painful doses, and most days, I didn't feel free at all. I felt empty. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for a man who wasn't there anymore, only to remember that the man I once loved had already left long before I told him to. I hated myself for missing him, even in the smallest ways. Missing the sound of his laugh, the way he used to hold my hand while driving, the warmth of his side of the bed. Betrayal doesn't erase memory. It just stains it, makes every happy moment feel like a lie you didn't know you were telling yourself. But as the weeks stretched on, something inside me started to shift. At first, it was little things. I noticed how calm the house felt without Mark stomping around, raising his voice when the kids spilled juice or forgot to put their shoes away. I noticed how peaceful dinners were, just me and the kids at the table. No awkward silence, no forced smiles, no pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I started laughing again, real laughter, not the hollow sound I'd used for years. It was like I was rediscovering pieces of myself that I'd buried under the weight of our marriage. The woman who loved reading late into the night, the one who painted for fun, who dreamed about traveling someday. She was still there, waiting to be found. And every day I felt her coming back. Mark didn't disappear, of course. Men like him never do. Even after moving in with Dana, he kept circling me like a vulture that couldn't decide if the body was dead yet. He'd call to check in on the kids, but slipping comments about how lonely he was, how Dana wasn't what he expected, how maybe we could start fresh. As if starting fresh could erase the way he'd broken me. Sometimes I'd hang up. Other times I'd let him talk, just to hear the desperation in his voice. There was something almost satisfying about it, watching him flounder, realizing that the woman he had gambled everything for wasn't the prize he thought she was. Dana might have been exciting in stolen moments, but reality is different. Reality is bills and responsibilities to kids who need help with homework, a partner who demands respect. And Dana, from what I heard, wasn't built for reality. At first, I didn't think much about revenge. I was too focused on healing, on keeping my kids steady, on remembering how to breathe without bitterness choking me. But revenge has a way of planting itself quietly, like a seed you didn't even know had been sown. And for me, that seed was Dana's smile. That smug, almost triumphant smirk she gave me in the office break room. I replayed it over and over. In my head, she wasn't just with my husband, she was proud of it. She wanted me to see. That smile told me she thought she'd won. And that thought that she believed she'd stolen my life, my family, my future, was something I couldn't let go of. So, slowly, carefully, I started to imagine what it would feel like to wipe that smile off her face. Not with shouting or violence. No, that wasn't my style. I wanted something cleaner, sharper. I wanted her to feel the same humiliation, the same loss, the same gut-wrenching ache that I had felt standing in that office doorway. I wanted her to learn what it meant to build something on stolen ground and to watch it collapse under her feet. I didn't act right away. Revenge isn't something you rush, it's something you plan. And in the quiet nights, after the kids were asleep and the house was mine again, I started planning. Not out of rage, though God knows I had plenty of that, but out of a strange, cold clarity. It wasn't about Mark anymore. He was just a broken man, pathetic and pitiful, clinging to whatever scraps of comfort he could find. But Dana was different. She had taken something from me and flaunted it, as if she deserved it. And that was something I couldn't forgive. As the months passed, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I was still a mother, still tired, still healing, but beneath the surface, something new was growing, a strength I hadn't known before. And alongside that strength was the quiet, simmering promise I repeated to myself every night before bed. One day, Dana, one day, you'll understand what you've done. By the time a year had passed since the divorce, my life looked steadier on the surface. The kids had adjusted, my routines were smoother, and I'd gotten used to the quiet of a house without Mark's heavy footsteps echoing through the halls. But inside, I carried a secret weight, the simmering promise I'd made to myself, that one day Dana would know exactly what she'd done. Not just in some vague karmic sense, but in a way she could feel in her bones. That promise stayed tucked away most days, like a locked box in the back of my mind. But every time Dana inserted herself into my life, and believe me, she did it, more often than you'd expect, that box rattled open. She didn't just live with Mark. She made it her mission to remind me she was the new woman in his life. She'd show up at school events with him, clinging to his arm, smiling that smug smile like she'd earned something valuable. And when our paths crossed, her words dripped with venom. One night, after a parent-teacher conference, she pulled me aside in the parking lot. She leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume, sharp, expensive, the kind of scent meant to leave an impression, and whispered, "You know, Mark tells me all the time how repulsed he was by you. Those stretch marks, that body. He said he stayed only because of the kids." She smirked, satisfied, before strutting off like she'd just delivered a fatal blow. I remember gripping my car keys so hard they left little crescents in my palm. My chest burned with humiliation, but beneath the sting, I felt something else, clarity. For years, I'd been trying to be the bigger person, swallowing my anger, reminding myself that the kids needed stability. But that night in the parking lot, I realized being the bigger person wasn't the same as being silent. Silence had protected her, given her space to twist the knife deeper, and I was done handing her that power. It wasn't about Mark anymore. Honestly, he was just a sad man playing house with a woman who thought she'd won some prize. He still texted me late at night sometimes, begging for another chance, painting Dana as temporary, disposable. I ignored him most of the time, but I saved those messages. Every degrading word he'd said about her, every late-night confession that she wasn't what he wanted, every reminder that she was safe only because she couldn't give him more children, I kept them all. At first, it wasn't intentional, but by then, I realized they were ammunition. And here's the thing, Dana thought she had me figured out. To her, I was the bitter ex-wife, too broken, too unwanted, too tied down to move on. She paraded her victory without realizing she was standing on quicksand. She didn't know about the texts. She didn't know how desperate Mark sounded at 2 a.m. when he swore he still loved me. She didn't know she was the punchline in her own story. So, I waited, not passively, but with purpose. I kept my distance, ignored her public jabs, let her think she was untouchable. Meanwhile, I collected every piece of proof I had, every text, every voicemail. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. The turning point came on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. I was sitting in the carpool line, waiting to pick up my kids, when my phone buzzed. A new message from Dana. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won, and there it was, another taunt. She told me I should get used to being alone, that no man would ever want me again, not even the father of my children. She wrote that she was everything I wasn't, desirable, wanted, loved. That was the moment the seed of revenge finally bloomed, because here's the truth. Humiliation is heavy, but it's also fuel. I wasn't going to scream at her in parking lots or throw cheap insults back at her. No, my weapon would be the truth, her truth, and the cruelest part of it all. I didn't even need to make anything up. Mark had handed me everything I needed to dismantle her pride piece by piece. So as I drove away with my kids in the back seat, chatting about their day, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I knew exactly how I was going to break Dana. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon, and when it happened, she wouldn't just lose her smug smile. She'd lose the illusion she'd been clinging to all this time. After that message in the carpool line, I realized Dana had crossed into dangerous territory. She wasn't just taunting me anymore, she was trying to rewrite my story, to convince me that I was worthless, unwanted, and forgotten. And the thing that infuriated me most, she did it with such confidence, like she believed she'd earned the right to speak for me, as if she owned the narrative of my life. I kept thinking about how bold she was, sending that message while sitting in the house I used to live in, surrounded by furniture I had picked out, maybe even curled up in the bed where my kids used to crawl in on Saturday mornings. There was a cruelty to it that went beyond rivalry. It wasn't enough for her to be with Mark. She wanted to erase me entirely. At school, the digs became louder. During a parent-teacher conference, she interrupted while I was speaking with one of the teachers. In front of everyone, she smirked and said, "You should really stop pretending like you have it all together. Everyone knows Mark left because he couldn't stand to look at you anymore." Her voice carried across the room, and though I tried to keep my face calm, I felt the heat creep up my neck. The teacher's eyes widened, the silence in the room. heavy with discomfort. And still, Dana stood there with her arms crossed, triumphant. That was the moment I realized her game wasn't just about me. It was about an audience. She wanted witnesses to my humiliation, people to validate her narrative. And that was her biggest mistake. Because humiliation shared in public always leaves traces, and witnesses always remember more than you want them to. Instead of firing back, I bit my tongue. I smiled faintly, thanked the teacher, and walked out without saying a word. On the drive home, the kids chatted in the back seat, blissfully unaware, and I let their voices anchor me. Dana thought my silence was weakness, but in reality, it was patience. Every jab she made in public gave me leverage. She was too arrogant to see it, but she was building her own downfall. Brick by brick. At night, when the kids were asleep, I would scroll through my phone, rereading Mark's old texts. Some of them still stung his attempts to lure me back. His pathetic attempts to downplay what he'd done. But hidden between those lines were the words that would cut Dana deepest. Words where he dismissed her, reduced her to safe fun, mocked her infertility as the very reason she was convenient. Words that revealed she wasn't the chosen one. She was the backup plan, the placeholder. I remember sitting there in the quiet of my living room, the glow of my phone lighting up my face, and whispering to myself, not yet, but soon. Revenge isn't about the moment you lash out. It's about precision, about choosing the exact second when your opponent thinks they've won, only to realize the ground beneath them is crumbling. And Dana made it easy for me. She couldn't stop herself. The more she pushed, the more ammunition she gave me. She called me dried up in front of other parents. She told people I was desperate and pathetic. She even went so far as to show up at soccer practice once, leaning over the fence with Mark beside her, shouting insults just loud enough for the other mums to hear. Every time she opened her mouth, she exposed just how obsessed she really was with me. The irony was almost laughable. She thought she had stolen my husband, my life, my dignity, but the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about me. She was so consumed with proving she'd won that she didn't realize that competition had ended the moment I walked away. And that's when I knew my silence wasn't going to last much longer. Because when a woman builds her entire sense of worth on another person's validation, all it takes is one crack in that foundation to bring it all down. And I already had the hammer in my hand, Mark's own words, waiting to shatter the illusion Dana had built around herself. So I waited, storing away every smirk, every insult, every petty text. Let her think she was untouchable. Let her believe she had rewritten the story. Because the day was coming when I'd flip the script, and Dana wouldn't just lose her smile. She'd lose the very thing she thought she had stolen from me, control. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when you'd expect nothing more dramatic than folding laundry and cooking dinner. I was in the kitchen with my daughter, helping her measure flour for cookies, when my phone buzzed. At first, I ignored it. Sundays were my sacred days with the kids. But then it buzzed again and again, until I finally wiped my hands and picked it up. It was Dana, of course. The message was longer than usual, practically a monologue. She went on about how pathetic it was that I'd been single since the divorce. How even my ex-husband, the man who knew me best, couldn't stomach the thought of being with me. She twisted the knife deeper, saying the only reason Mark kept quiet about his disgust was out of pity for our children. She ended it with a flourish. Face it, no one wants you. Not Mark, not anyone. That's why he came to me. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. My daughter was still chattering beside me, completely unaware that her mother's world had just been set ablaze again. I forced a smile, finished the baking, tucked my kids into bed that night. But the moment the house went quiet, I sat on the couch, phone in hand, and pulled up the folder I'd been saving for years. Every degrading text, every late-night confession from Mark, every cruel remark about Dana's infertility, about how she was safe because she couldn't trap him with another child, about how she was never someone he'd want long-term, just fun to pass. The time my thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling through the evidence like a deck of razor-sharp cards. For years, I'd told myself to wait, to be patient, to pick the right moment, and now it was here. I didn't overthink it. I didn't draft or rehearse. I simply chose a handful of the most cutting messages, took clear screenshots, and hit send. The silence after was heavy. My phone screen glowed in the dark, and I watched a little delivered checkmark sit there like a ticking bomb. Minutes later, the explosion came. Dana's first reply was disbelief. "What the hell is this? Where did you even get this?" Then came anger. "You're sick. You're twisted. You went through all this just to attack me." She tried to deflect, accusing me of being obsessed with her, of being cruel for bringing up her infertility. And then came the most telling line of all. "If any of this were true, why wouldn't you have warned me before?" I laughed out loud in the quiet of my living room. A sharp, humorless sound. Warn her. The same woman who had smirked at me in the office, mocked my body, humiliated me at school, and gloated about stealing my husband. She didn't deserve warnings. She deserved the truth, raw and unfiltered. So I typed back, steady and calm. "I didn't warn you because I owed you nothing. You knew about me, about our kids, and you still chose to crawl into my marriage. You helped break my family. And for years, I stayed quiet while you degraded me in front of anyone who would listen. Don't talk to me about cruelty. Look inside your own house. Check the dates on those messages. See for yourself exactly what kind of man you thought you were." I hit send and set the phone down, my hands trembling. For a moment I felt the familiar rush of doubt. Had I gone too far? Was this petty? But then the phone buzzed again and again, and the flood of angry, panicked messages poured in. Dana's smug veneer was cracking right there in real time. I muted the conversation, not blocked. I couldn't, legally, not while she was living with Mark and occasionally around my kids. But I didn't need to read anymore. I'd already done what I set out to do. For years, she'd chipped away at me, trying to strip me of dignity, joy, and peace. And with a few screenshots, I'd turned the mirror around. She couldn't unsee those words now. She couldn't unknow that the man she'd gambled everything on had never respected her, never loved her the way she imagined. I leaned back into the couch, exhaling for what felt like the first time in years. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It wasn't closure either. It was something quieter, heavier, the satisfaction of balance being restored. For years, Dana had thought she was holding the cards. Now she knew I had them all along. The days after I sent those screenshots were eerily quiet at first, too quiet. For years, Dana had been quick to fire off insults, eager to twist the knife whenever she had the chance. But now, silence. No late-night texts, no smug interruptions. At school, no staged smiles when she and Mark showed up together in public. It was like the storm had swallowed her whole dot. At first, I wondered if she was regrouping, planning some kind of retaliation. But then, whispers started to reach me. A mutual friend mentioned that Dana had been seen storming out of a restaurant with Mark trailing after her, red-faced and desperate. Another told me they'd overheard a screaming match in the grocery store parking lot. Dana's voice cutting through the night air like glass. "You said I was different. You said she was nothing to you." The friend didn't catch Mark's reply, but they didn't need to. I could imagine it. His bumbling excuses, his half-truths, his endless cycle of promises he'd never keep. And honestly, I didn't feel pity, not for her, not for him. They'd both chosen this. Dana had walked into my life knowing full well what she was doing, and Mark had always been a coward, chasing comfort instead of facing consequences. The two of them together were like gasoline and fire, volatile, destructive, bound to burn out eventually. All I'd done was speed up the explosion. Then came the texts from Mark. At first, they were panicked, defensive. "Why would you do this? You're trying to ruin me." Then they shifted, softer, almost pleading. "You know I never meant any of it. You're the only woman I've ever really loved. We can fix this." I didn't respond, not once. I'd learned long ago that replying only fed the cycle. But I read them all, and each message was a reminder of just how pathetic he had become. He wanted me to save him from the chaos he had created, to soothe the very wounds he had inflicted. The irony was almost poetic. Meanwhile, Dana couldn't contain herself for long. The silence broke one evening when my phone buzzed with a string of messages from her. She accused me of being obsessed, of stalking her, of trying to destroy her relationship. She claimed I was sick for dragging her infertility into the spotlight, as if I had conjured those words myself instead of simply holding up a mirror to the things Mark had already said. Her anger was frantic, almost unhinged. The messages came in bursts, caps lock, exclamation points, accusations that contradicted each other. One moment, she was claiming Mark had never said those things. The next, she was demanding to know how I could live with myself for not warning her sooner. I muted the thread again after skimming through, shaking my head. What struck me wasn't her fury. It was her desperation. Underneath all the insults, there was fear. Fear that the foundation of her relationship had been built on lies. Fear that she wasn't the chosen one she'd always believed herself to be. And that fear, that was my victory. Still, I kept my composure. I didn't gloat, didn't rub salt into the wound. I didn't need to. The truth had already done its job, and Dana was unraveling without any extra effort from me. My silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was power. The kids noticed little things, of course. They'd mention how tense things felt at their dad's place, how Dana seemed angry all the time, how Mark was more distracted than usual. I never pushed them for details. They didn't need to be caught in the crossfire of adult messinesses. But I listened, and every story they told me confirmed what I already knew. The cracks in Dana's perfect. Facade was spreading fast. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't on the losing end. Not because I wanted Mark back, God no, that ship had sunk long ago, but because Dana finally knew what it felt like to live with doubt gnawing at her. She finally understood what it was like to wonder if the person beside you was secretly laughing at you, degrading you, betraying you behind your back, and that, more than any screaming match or petty insult, was the sweetest revenge I could have asked for. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread beyond whispered rumors. Dana and Mark had always loved performing their perfect couple act for the world. The carefully staged selfies, the matching outfits, the overdought captions about fate and soulmates. But almost overnight, that act started to crack. The first sign was subtle. Dana stopped posting. No more date night photos. No more smug little quotes about true love conquering all. Then, after a week of silence, she reappeared online. But the tone had shifted. Gone were the smiles. Instead, she posted vague, bitter captions about betrayal, about fake people trying to ruin her happiness. Her followers ate it up, of course, sending hearts and words of support. But anyone who knew the truth could see it for what it was: damage control. Mark, on the other hand, tried to pretend nothing had changed. He still liked Dana's posts, still left little comments under her pictures, still tried to act like the loyal partner. But his effort looked hollow, almost performative. And when a mutual friend accidentally let slip that Dana had been staying with her sister for space, it became clear that the fairy tale was collapsing from the inside. Meanwhile, my life steadied. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was constantly bracing for the next blow. The kids and I fell into our own rhythm. Homework at the kitchen table, movie nights with too much popcorn, lazy Saturday mornings where nobody had to walk on eggshells. The house felt lighter, freer. There was a moment one evening that sticks with me. I was folding laundry, half listening to the kids argue about who got the last cookie, when it hit me. I wasn't angry, not anymore. The rage that had burned so hot for so long had cooled into something quieter, steadier. Not forgiveness, never that, but a sense of release. I had handed Dana the rope, and she was doing the rest herself. I didn't need to interfere, but Dana couldn't stop herself from interfering with me. She showed up at school one afternoon, waiting by her car, her eyes bloodshot and wild. "You think you've won, don't you?" she spat as I walked past. I stopped, turned slowly, and met her gaze. I don't need to win. I just needed the truth out there. Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she might cry. But then she snapped, her voice rising. "He chose me. He still chooses me. You'll always be bitter and alone, clinging to scraps of what you used to have." I almost laughed. Almost instead, I shrugged. "If that's what you believe, hold onto it. Sounds like you need it more than I do." And then I walked away, leaving her standing there, shaking, her words echoing like a desperate chant she was trying to convince herself of. That was the last time she confronted me face to face. After that, everything between them unraveled in the shadows. I heard stories, arguments, so loud the neighbors called the cops. Dana smashing Mark's phone in the driveway. Mark showing up to work with scratches across his arms. Their chaos became a spectacle, and the same friends who had once gossiped about me now whispered about them instead, and me. I chose peace. I stopped checking their profiles, stopped feeding my curiosity. Every time Mark's number flashed on my phone, I let it go to voicemail. Every time Dana tried to bait me with some cryptic message or veiled threat, I ignored it. I had no desire to stand in the flames anymore. The sweetest part wasn't their destruction, it was my detachment. For years, they had fed off my reactions, my pain, my silence. But now, I was free. They could claw at each other all they wanted. I had already walked away. By the time fall rolled around, the cracks between Mark and Dana weren't cracks anymore. They were canyons. What had started as whispers among friends turned into gossip so loud it spilled into public. People at the kids' school, neighbors, even distant relatives began to notice that Mark wasn't around much anymore. that Dana looked drained and brittle, a shell of the woman who once strutted into my home with smug confidence. I'll admit, there were nights I lay awake replaying it all in my head. Not because I missed him, no, that part of me had died long before, but because I couldn't believe how fast karma had caught up. It was almost too perfect, like the universe was staging its own little drama and inviting me to sit front row. The stories came in fragments, each one sharper than the last. A mutual friend mentioned seeing Dana screaming at Mark in a grocery store parking lot, waving her arms so wildly that security had to step in. Another time, Mark supposedly showed up at a bar alone, muttering to anyone who'd listen about how she ruined everything. And then came the kicker. Dana, in a fit of rage, posting and deleting a rant on social media about being used and discarded by a man who can't keep his promises. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who once taunted me for being too weak to keep her husband was now painting herself as the victim of the very man she stole. And Mark, well, Mark looked smaller every time I caught a glimpse of him. Shoulders hunched, eyes tired, like the weight of his choices had finally settled in. One afternoon, while picking up the kids, I overheard two other mums whispering by the curb. "Did you hear about Dana? She showed up to the office crying, saying, 'Mark hasn't been home in days.'" I walked past them quietly, hiding the smile tugging at my lips. That was when it hit me. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need revenge plotted in shadows. The best revenge was already happening, in slow motion, right in front of everyone. They had burned their own house down, and all I had to do was watch from a distance, untouched by the flames. The kids adjusted to, first, they'd ask about their dad, about why things were so different. I answered gently, never bad-mouthing him, just telling the truth in pieces they could handle. Over time, their questions faded. They saw who showed up for them, who tucked them in at night, who kept the fridge stocked and the bills paid. And without realizing it, they stopped expecting him to fill that role. Mark tried, in his own stumbling way, to bridge the gap. He'd show up with gifts, a new video game, sneakers, thinking material things could patch what was broken. But kids are smarter than people give them credit for. They accepted the gifts politely, then carried on with their day. The man they once saw as a superhero was just human now, flawed, absent, and slowly fading into the background of their lives. As for Dana, she clung harder. Her posts grew darker, more desperate. Late-night rants about betrayal, passive-aggressive memes about loyalty, cryptic lines about losing yourself for someone who never deserved you. She wasn't taunting me anymore. She wasn't gloating. She was unraveling, strand by strand, for everyone to see, and I was finally free enough to stop caring. That was the real victory. Not watching them destroy each other, not hearing the gossip or catching the rumors, but realizing that my happiness no longer depended on their misery. Their downfall was just extra, a sideshow. My real revenge was the quiet life I built without them, the laughter echoing through my home, the peace I felt slipping into bed each night without the weight of suspicion on my chest. I'll never forget the night I bumped into Dana one last time. It was at a mutual friends gathering, months after the split had become official. She looked different, thinner, pale, eyes sunken. When our eyes met across the room, she froze, then quickly looked away. For once, there was no smugness, no fire, no venom, just emptiness. I didn't approach her. I didn't need to. Her silence told me everything. She knew she'd lost, not just Mark, but herself. And the worst part, I hadn't lifted a finger to make it happen. That was the sweetest revenge of all. The dust eventually settled, not all at once, but slowly, like the smoke clearing after a long, devastating fire. The kids were the first to sense it. Our home, once weighed down by the unspoken tension of betrayal, began to breathe again. Dinner wasn't just food on plates, it was laughter, stories about their day, silly arguments over who got the last slice of pizza. Bedtime became a ritual of peace, warm hugs, whispered goodnights, the comforting knowledge that tomorrow would be steady, predictable, safe. For the first time in years, I felt like the ground beneath my feet wasn't shifting. I no longer waited for the other shoe to drop. The texts from Mark dwindled until they disappeared completely. Dana's venomous outbursts dried up too, like she'd run out of fuel. Maybe they were still together, maybe not. I didn't care enough to check. Their chaos had no doorway into my house anymore. What filled the silence was something I hadn't realized I missed: myself. I started small. Saturday mornings, after dropping the kids at soccer practice, I'd sit at a coffee shop with a book, not scrolling, not checking for drama, just reading. It felt foreign at first, like I was trespassing into a life I'd forgotten belonged to me. But with each passing week, I remembered how much I loved stories, how much I craved quiet moments that were mine alone. Friends noticed the change. They'd say, "You're glowing again," or "You look lighter." At first I brushed it off, but eventually I saw it in the mirror too. The dark circles weren't as deep. The permanent line of stress across my forehead softened. I could breathe without that constant ache in my chest. There were nights, though, when the loneliness crept in. After the kids went to bed and the house grew quiet, I'd catch myself wondering if this was it. If I was destined to raise them alone, to never feel the kind of partnership I once dreamed marriage would bring. But then I'd remind myself, solitude is not the same as emptiness. I wasn't empty. My days were full of purpose, of love, of tiny hands slipping into mine as we crossed parking lots. One evening, my daughter, just 9 years old, curled up next to me on the couch. She looked at me with those wide, serious eyes kids get when they're about to say something bigger than themselves. "Mum," she said softly, "I like it better now. You smile more, you laugh more." That broke me in the best way, because it wasn't just about me healing, it was about them too. They could see the difference, feel the peace. All the effort I'd poured into shielding them from the mess was paying off. Our home was no longer a battlefield, it was a sanctuary. And in those quiet victories, I found my strength. I didn't need to compare myself to Dana, or wonder if Mark regretted what he lost. Their stories had ended for me. What mattered was the one I was writing now, for myself and for the kids. And slowly, piece by piece, I was starting to believe it could be a beautiful one. There came a point when I realized I was no longer living in reaction to the past. For so long, every choice I made carried the shadow of what Mark and Dana had done. Even the smallest things, deciding whether to attend a school function, accepting an invitation to a barbecue, posting a picture on social media. I'd catch myself wondering, will this get back to them? What will they think? But one afternoon, as I was planting flowers in the front yard with the kids, I had this moment of clarity. I don't care anymore. The weight of their opinions, their judgments, their drama, it had evaporated. What remained was just me, my children, and the life we were building brick by brick. That summer, I did things I hadn't dared to do in years. I took the kids on A road trip to the coast, blasting music in the car and stopping at every quirky roadside diner we saw. We built sandcastles until the tide washed them away, laughed until our cheeks hurt, and ate ice cream for dinner just because we could. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was compensating for what they'd lost. I was simply giving them and myself joy. Back home, I began saying yes more often. Yes to brunch with friends. Yes to trying a pottery class. Yes to letting someone else watch the kids for a night so I could sit alone at a movie theater, with popcorn the size of my head. These weren't grand gestures, but they were declarations. I am allowed to live. I am allowed to enjoy, of course. Traces of the past still lingered. Sometimes Mark would show up late for pickup, and I'd see the exhaustion etched into his face. Sometimes Dana's name would slip into conversation, usually attached to another story of her spiraling, a public meltdown, another bitter post, whispers of her trying and failing to cling to what was left of their relationship. But those moments didn't sting anymore. They were like watching a storm rage in the distance, loud, destructive, but far enough away that it couldn't touch me. The turning point came on a night I'll never forget. I was sitting on the porch after the kids had gone to bed, sipping tea and watching fireflies. The air was warm, the kind of still summer evening that makes you pause and breathe. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. For a split second, the old reflex kicked in. My stomach tightened, my mind braced for whatever manipulation he was about to try. But when I opened it, all it said was, "I'm sorry for everything. You didn't deserve it." Once upon a time, those words would have cracked me open. They would have tempted me with hope, with the fantasy that maybe he could change, that maybe we could patch together the wreckage. But that night, sitting on my porch with the soft glow of fireflies, I felt nothing. No rage, no longing, no ache, just peace. I typed back a single sentence. I know. Then I put my phone down, leaned back, and let the quiet wrap around me. That was when I knew I had finally stepped out of the shadow. His apology didn't define me. Dana's bitterness didn't define me. Even the betrayal itself, as life-shattering as it once was, didn't define me anymore. What defined me was the laughter in my living room, the tiny victories of motherhood, the rediscovery of who I was when no one else's chaos was steering my life. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was proud of myself. Life has a funny way of moving forward, even when you think you're standing still. One morning, I woke up, brewed my coffee, and realized the heaviness that once lived in my chest was gone. Not lessened, not numbed, but gone. What replaced? It wasn't fireworks or grand revelations. It was a quiet steadiness. The kind you don't notice until it's been there a while. The kids were thriving. My son had joined the middle school band, proudly lugging his trumpet case around like it was treasure. My daughter had taken to drawing, filling every scrap of paper in the house with doodles and bright splashes of color. Watching them grow into themselves was like watching little miracles unfold every day. They weren't just surviving the divorce. They were blooming, and knowing I had given them the soil to do that made every sleepless night, every tear shed, behind closed doors, worth it. As for me, I started entertaining the possibility of more, not in a desperate way, not in the way I once clung to Mark for validation, but in a gentle curiosity. What if I did go on a date again? What if I let myself enjoy a conversation that wasn't about co-parenting schedules or bills? The thought used to scare me, but now it felt Possible it started small. A kind smile from a dad at the soccer field. A lingering conversation with a neighbor over the fence. Friends teasing me about setting up a dating profile, insisting I had plenty of life left to live. I didn't dive in head first, but I also didn't shut the door. For the first time in years, the idea of companionship didn't feel like a risk. It felt like an option. One Saturday, I found myself at a local farmer's market with the kids. The air was buzzing with music, vendors calling out their goods, the scent of fresh bread and flowers weaving through the crowd. As I picked out peaches, the vendor, a kind-eyed man with laugh lines carved deep around his face, struck up a conversation. It wasn't flirty or forced, just easy. He asked about recipes, joked about his inability to pick ripe fruit, and complimented the kids on their energy. When we walked away, my daughter leaned close and whispered, "Mum, he likes you." I laughed it off, but deep down, I felt a spark I hadn't felt in years. Not love, not yet, but something. A reminder that I wasn't invisible, that life could surprise me in gentle ways. Driving home that day, with peaches in the back seat and the kids singing along to the radio, I realized the story wasn't ending. Betrayal had been a chapter. Heartbreak, anger, even revenge, all chapters. But this was the start of something new. I didn't know where it would lead, and for once, I was okay with not knowing, because the truth is, the best endings aren't really endings at all. They're beginnings in disguise. Months passed, and the rhythm of our new life solidified into something comforting and familiar. The house was no longer a battlefield of whispers and tension. It was a place of laughter, homework sprawled across the kitchen table, and the occasional debate over whose turn it was to choose the movie. Every day was a reminder that we had survived, that we had moved forward, and that the ghosts of the past no longer dictated the pace of our lives. Mark and Dana's chaos became a distant hum. Rumors here and there, fleeting social media glimpses, but it didn't matter. Their story was theirs to navigate, and mine no longer intersected with theirs. There was freedom in that distance, a liberation I hadn't felt in years. I didn't carry grudges. I didn't rehearse comebacks or check for signs of their continued drama. I just existed, fully present, fully alive, with my children beside me. It wasn't perfect, of course. The shadows of what had happened would occasionally flicker in the quiet moments. A new story, a passing thought, a lingering memory of betrayal. But these shadows were faint, powerless against the sunlight of our ordinary days. I had reclaimed my narrative, and that was what mattered most. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low behind the trees, I found myself walking hand in hand with my kids in the park. My daughter chattered endlessly about her school project, my son about the new song he was learning on his trumpet. Their energy, their innocence, their unwavering trust in me. It filled my chest with a warmth I hadn't realized I'd missed. For the first time, I considered the possibility of love again, not as a desperate attempt to replace what I'd lost, but as a new chapter, one where I could be fully myself without fear. The thought didn't consume me, it intrigued me, and maybe one day I'd take that step. But for now, the world felt wide and welcoming, full of potential, and entirely mine to explore. The truth hit me in that quiet, golden moment. I had survived betrayal. I had endured humiliation, manipulation, and heartbreak. I had faced the woman who thought she could break me, and the man who once called himself my partner, only to prove he was human, flawed, and incapable of the loyalty I deserved. And yet, here I was, standing taller than ever, surrounded by the people who mattered most. I realized then that revenge had never been about hurting Dana or Mark. It had been about reclaiming myself, my power, my dignity. And I had done it, not through confrontation or rage alone, but through resilience, patience, and an unwavering focus on what truly mattered. Looking at my kids, seeing them safe, happy, and thriving, I knew I had won in the only way that counted. And as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I smiled. The past was behind me, the present was vibrant, and the future was open, filled with promise, ready for me to step into it. And so we walked home together, the three of us, carrying the light of our own story, unbroken, unapologetic, and unstoppable.